I want you all to know up front that I am a parent of a 20-year-old daughter. And I have had the incredible blessing of studying a lot about parenting, and also through what will soon be the 10-year anniversary of Good Life Project, sitting down with many of the leading voices from psychologists to researchers to social scientists in the domain of parenting. I'm somebody who's a perpetual student, and sort of hold myself in being always in a beginner's mindset. And I feel like I certainly know more than I did 20 years ago. But what I'm sure of is something that I tend to hold much more lightly. But what I did start to realize, which was fascinating, which I think also really broadens out this month's topic, is as I started writing down these things and really asking myself, what have I noticed and what's really important to me in this domain of parenting, I started writing out almost like a set of principles. And then, supporting ideas around it, and then stories around it. What I realized was that you can pretty much draw a straight line to so many of the ideas around parenting and leadership, which I was kind of fascinated to see, because fundamentally it's about, creating a relationship that is sacred, that is bounded, that is trusting, and then creating a sort of an ethos within that relationship. And so the context really expands beyond, I think, what we consider to be just always traditional parenting. That said, I'm going to draw a lot on my own experience, both as a former child, which I happen to be, and some might argue I still am at various moments throughout my day or week, and as a father, as a husband, and as somebody who has gone deep into a lot of different literature and research and had an amazing opportunity to speak to a lot of leading voices. But I'm going to keep it pretty personal too, because I think that's the place I can speak most to from my heart. So what I would love to do is share just a number of sort of what I would call principles. And always remembering that I am a student along this journey with you. And when I think about my relationship with my own child, who's now an adult, I learn as much from her, and I will for every waking day of my life, as she does from me. And I'm grateful for that. If I hold myself open to the possibility of always being a student of who she is in the world, I will perpetually grow from that experience. And I think that is a beautiful thing to be able to step into. So let's start talking about some of these principles. So for me, I've studied human flourishing a lot. And I often reference one of the, I think it actually is the longest running ever study on human flourishing, which is the Grant study, which tracked a series of people for, I believe it was about 80 years, and looked at literally every part of their life and said, if you could look at all these different metrics, from their behavior to their jobs, to their relationships, to their state of physical and mental well-being, and I examined what contributed to a life well lived. And the longest running curator of that study, George Valiant, was once asked, if you could pull any single metric out from this and say that it was most determinative of a life well lived, what would it be? And his answer is love, full stop. So many things in my life come back to this notion of love. And I think in the context of parenting, that is really, it is the central thing for me, to let a child know that they are loved without condition is maybe the most powerful thing that I can do. I believe that I can do as a parent, to let them understand that there is nothing that you have to do. There is nothing that you have to say. There is no one no one that you need to be. There is no person that you need to become. There is nothing you have to accomplish in order for me to love you. Is about the most powerful thing that I could do. as a parent. And that's probably, about the most core belief that I have around parenting, that there's no performance aspect that is required as a part of a condition of love. And the flip side is also true. And that is that there is no mistake. There's no stumble. There's no moment where you won't measure up to expectation. There's no thing that you could choose or do wrong that will, as a parent, make me stop loving you or make me love you less. I may not agree with you. I may not agree with your decision. I may not agree with your behavior, with your action at any given moment in time. And that disagreement may be strong. But to be able to convey simultaneously that we can disagree, but I will never stop loving you because of that. That you can stumble, but I will never stop loving you because of that. That you can make a mistake, maybe a large mistake, and I will never stop loving you because of that. And there's no condition that will get between you and my love for you is a really powerful, powerful thing. I think that creates a container for a child to step into the world from a place of grounded love, where there's a foundation. It's like there's a bedrock underneath what they do, where they're more willing to be themselves, to stumble, to go into the world and try things and know that they can always come home to love. In the real world, confidence is very often unavailable at the moments where you have to make the biggest decisions, and there is no way to actually get it. What we started thinking about here is the fact that it's not about confidence in real life, nor do you want it to be about confidence. It's about the opportunity to be changed by a moment or an experience. Because the truth is, in the real world, the only way to be 100% confident about anything is if you've already done it, or if someone else has already done it. And at that point, confidence doesn't really matter, because when you're 100% confident that it will work and you will succeed, you have simultaneously reduced the stakes to a point where you won't care even if you succeed. It just doesn't matter anymore. So I'm going to propose to you that it's actually not about confidence. That's really not what we're going for here, right? I'm going to propose an alternative frame to you. And that's that it's the moments you're not confident, but find a way to do it anyway, that hold the greatest opportunity for growth. So rather than us trying to figure out how can I get confident, how can I do the things that will make me feel 100% confident, how can I gather the facts or the skills or the information, the things that matter the most, the places where the stakes are the highest and the opportunity for growth and success and amazement and awe and connection and serendipity and impact and purpose and meaning, those experiences, those interactions, those moments, those endeavors and pursuits, guess what? You will never have anywhere close to 100% confidence in your own ability to pull it off, or in the world rallying to support it or you. But you gotta find a way to act anyway, because those are the windows. Those are the moments. Those are the seasons of our life when we don't know, but somehow we still act. And when we actually can find a way through, when we keep making decisions and taking actions and keep stepping forward and forward and forward, even when our head is spinning and the world is uncertain and we have very little confidence, we just don't know if it's going to work or not. When we find the ability to do that, and then we progress through it and we take baby steps towards this vision that we have, that is the most magical place to be. It's not even the achievement of the end state that really fuels us up and lights us up. It's the process. It's the process of growing. It's the process of putting yourself in a place where you have the opportunity to be changed by the experience. And if you are 100% confident that you can do it and that the universe will support it and there's no way to fail, it doesn't matter to you anymore. What you have effectively done is made yourself comfortable, but eliminated the opportunity to experience growth. I'm going to suggest something different here. Instead of pursuing confidence, what I'm going to suggest is that we take a different approach, that we cultivate unconfident action meta skills, that we actually intentionally put ourselves in a place on a regular basis where we go out into the world and we don't know how it's going to end, where there's no easy way to have confidence that this is going to work or we will be able to pull it off and still be okay there, because that is the fertile ground of life. So let's talk about some of these skills, okay? I call these the ABCs. The first one is awareness and ease. What I'm talking about here is the ability to see clearly and find peace in the space of groundlessness. So that's really kind of two things, but the practices are related. We want to know that we're looking out into the horizon and we can see as clearly and truthfully as possible, and also looking internally and understanding what is my internal state? How clear can I get about that? I want to become aware of the internal and external states, because that is one of the things that will allow me to make effective decisions rather than spinning all sorts of anxiety-based or doom-based projections, right? We want to become aware, and we want to cultivate the practices that will let us feel a sense of ease. The second one is bravery. And what I'm talking about when I talk about bravery is a willingness to act even when you don't know if it will work. And the third thing, right, this is the C here, is conviction. And when I'm talking about conviction, I'm talking about a deep knowing around why it matters and what the stakes are. So those are what I call the ABCs of cultivating action in the face of unconfidence. Let's start with conviction. So when I talk about conviction here, what I'm really talking about is to ask the why question 5 to 10 times, and then we're going to step away from it, ask it again, and journal. Now, why is this so important in the context of us doing things, knowing that no matter how much we try, there is no one moment where if the stakes are high and we haven't already done it before, that we will ever be 100% confident. So it can be these tiny little moments, or it could be launching something huge into the world or starting a new career. When we do that, we're taking a risk and we're going to stumble along the way. And the bigger it is, the more complex it is, the longer the time frame, the more likely it is that we're going to keep meeting barrier after barrier after barrier. When that happens, one of the things that allows us to continue to take steps and make decisions is understanding why we said yes to it in the first place. But very often, when we ask ourselves, well, why does this matter to me? We come up with a superficial answer at first. And then if we keep drilling down though, but why does that answer matter to me? And then why does that answer matter to me? And then why does that answer matter to me? You know, so if I'm going to move from one place to an entirely different state or country, you know, I could say, well, I'm moving from New York to Colorado, for example. You know, like, and I would say, well, there's a lot of risk involved in that. I'm not confident in myself that I'll be able to handle the move and work effectively and be okay. And I don't, you know, but I still have to take some action. And I would say to myself, well, why would it matter to me to be there? Well, because, you know, I love the outdoors and, you know, there's snowboarding nearby and, okay, but why does that matter to me? Well, because there's something about the outdoors. And when I'm snowboarding on a mountain that changes the way that I feel. Okay. And why does that matter to me? Well, because as you get deeper into life, very often, you become more attuned to the passage of time. And I am attuned to that. And I want to know that in whatever time I have on this planet, I'm doing things that allow me to feel connected and alive. And then you keep going like that 2 more times until you get to a place where you get the most authentic answer. And here's what you do then. Instead of writing it down saying, I'm done, you walk away, because the real juice happens after you do that. Because you take a pause, but your brain does not. Your subconscious brain keeps running the script, running the question over and over and over. You don't even realize it. And then 3 days later, you're walking down the street and your brain says, this. This is the real reason why. And when you get that, you write it down, you write about it, you reflect on it, you journal it, and you put it in print, not by typing it into a computer, but by literally writing it with your hands. It's because it changes the brain. It wires it differently when you memorialize things that way. So you write it down. And this is so important because when you start to stumble, when you hit roadblocks, when things happen that keep you questioning, what happens is when you can revisit the deepest why, it gives you this sense of conviction. It says, oh, this is why this mattered to me. This is what the stakes are. And I care deeply about these stakes. So even though I don't know if I'm going to succeed, I'm not really confident in my ability to pull this off. And I don't know what's going to happen. I'm going to keep taking action because it really, really matters to me. I think about this topic of calm striving. And I think about it from a lot of different perspectives. I think about it from the perspective as just a human being who's waking up and moving through the world and really working to try and achieve meaningful things in my own life. I think about it in the context of work. I am somebody who is wired to create things. My sparchetype or impulse for work that makes me come alive is the maker. So I wake up in the morning and it is about making ideas manifest, the process of creation. It's this fiercely generative state. We are in a moment in time right now where we're sort of coming back to a place of relative calm, but at the same time, there's a lot of groundlessness. So working to access a sense of calm when we feel like the ground beneath us is perpetually moving is a really challenging thing. And that's a challenging thing just in the context of being alive, of moving through each day. And then when we layer on top of that, the notion of striving to be a better person, striving to deepen into our relationships and be present, striving to build something substantial in the world, striving to show up as more ourselves, striving to bring something new into the world as I have recently. It can be a challenge. And so I was thinking about this topic. It's something I reflect on a lot because I am somebody who is driven to work hard and to try and make a lot of things happen. And at the same time, I deeply value my sense of peace and ease and equanimity. And I'm always balancing these two different things with each other. And trying to figure out how do I actually step into life, set big goals, have grand visions, work towards them, deal with all of the things that, the stumbles and the fumbles and the mistakes and the obstacles that come my way, because they always happen, and not get completely knocked over by them. Because a lot of moments in my life I have. I have been in the middle of a process and things didn't go the way that I wanted. And they just absolutely crushed me. And, I spent a lot of years trying to figure out, how do I approach things differently? How do I approach the process of striving to do something that really matters to me, or to be more of the person who I hope to be in the world? And also at the same time, do it in a way where I'm not letting go of as much of a sense of persistent ease, persistent grace as possible. And I've experimented with a lot of different things over the years. I've looked at a lot of different productivity tools and platforms, techniques, strategies. Fortunate to be friends with some folks who are some of the leading thinkers in this space. And you all have incredible exposure to many of those folks right here in GrowthDay who have been sharing awesome things throughout the month with you. And I thought today I might take a little bit of a meta lens on this topic of calm striving, which, if you have listened into my previous GrowthDay coaching sessions, you're probably not so surprised at, because it kind of tends to be my approach. I take sort of like a broader lens and a bit of a holistic approach. And I tend to think in frameworks that are helpful, at least to me, and hopefully to other people too, hopefully to you. So I want to share a bit of a framework that has been floating around in my mind for a while now. So know your why. right? So what am I talking about there? When you're working to do something, that very often requires a huge amount of effort. And that doesn't happen instantly, but unfolds over a period of time where you know there are going to be obstacles and all sorts of challenges that drop into the path. A lot of times, if we just basically say, this is the thing I want to do, it makes sense to me, and then start marching down that path to try and achieve it. We're stepping into a space of striving. When the obstacles start to drop into our way, when the challenges that we didn't see coming happen, when things don't go as imagined, when the assumptions that we thought were sort of critical to our saying yes to this particular thing start to get proven to be wrong, which happens all day, every day, whether it's writing a book, whether it's launching a company or a business or a project or brand. When that happens, it can bring you to your knees pretty quickly. What I found is one of the things that both allows you to return to an action stance and return to a baseline level of calm and ease is having a lot of clarity around the reason that you said yes to this in the first place, really understanding your why on a deep level. Because that basically lets you revisit this thing and say, okay, so things didn't go as I planned. Things didn't go as I wanted them to go. And I didn't even see this coming. But if I really understand why I said yes to this, and if the reason why is deep and meaningful to me, and I still believe it's possible, that will allow me to kind of let go of the anxiety spin, to let go of the self-flagellation, to let go of the negativity or the doomsday scenarios. Say, okay, this isn't going the way I thought it was going, but I am deeply committed because I understand why I said yes to this project in the first place. And it means so much to me. And I still believe this is possible, that I'm going to keep going. And that also allows me to come back to a place where I can kind of say, I didn't want this. I didn't expect it, but I care about continuing on. And I'm going to come back to center here. I'm going to keep returning to my fundamental reason why. And that brings me a certain grounding experience. So that has happened numerous times in the context of writing the book Sparked. I have, I started these ideas literally after 9/11. They've been brewing for almost 2 decades. We sold the book in March of 2020, and I was immediately heads down, literally as the city, New York City, was shutting down. I had just signed a book deal and I was deepening into the process of writing what I thought would be a relatively straightforward process, what I thought would be the opportunity to travel around, talk to tons of different people, interview them, certain amount of spaciousness that would make it easy for me to kind of vanish into my creative cave, know everything would be okay, know that all the other things would be, kind of humming along, know that the podcast, which is a central part of my devotion, it's an entire company that, we employ people, and it's a big part of, the revenue that allows me to sustain myself in the road, that would just kind of keep on keeping on. And in the blink of an eye, it didn't. Part of our podcast was based around the notion that we had a studio in New York and we only recorded in person. That was part of our value set, our production value commitment. And I blinked and that all had to end, which means that we had to spend a huge amount of time completely reimagining what that production was like, what the schedule was like, what the process was like, whether we could even continue and produce something that I would still be proud of. And that took a huge amount of effort that I didn't plan for, I didn't expect, and I didn't ask for, and I didn't want, to be honest with you. And that took me away from the process of writing a book, of meeting a deadline. And then there was like deep and profound concern about my family and about the city that I lived in, about the world around me, that consumed a huge amount of my cognitive and creative and emotional and spiritual bandwidth. I didn't see any of that coming. I didn't plan for any of it. And it really started to intrude on my ability to write, to do this thing that I was striving to do, let alone do it in a calm way, just to do it at all. And one of the things that really brought me back to center was I said to myself, why did I actually say yes to writing this book? Why did I say now is the time for me to sit down and write this book called Sparked and these ideas out into the world? And my answer was, for whatever reason, the research that we've done over the years has led me to a unique insight, which is that we all have a unique imprint for work that makes us come alive. And the development of tools and ideas. And I was sitting on a giant reservoir of stories and information and intel in my head that I truly believed would be helpful in some meaningful way to other people, and it was important for me to extract that from my head, both so that there was something that people could reference that wasn't just always coming to me, but also because I believe that we spend the vast majority of our waking hours doing this thing called work. And if that thing does not in some meaningful way give us the experience of meaning or purpose or the ability to lose ourselves in flow and express the essence of who we are, then we spend the vast majority of our waking hours doing something that is largely more emptying than filling. And that to me is not okay. It's not okay in my own life. And if I could play even the smallest role in helping folks see a different way, navigate, this thing called work differently, it was really important to me to write this book, to do this body of work, because I see so much suffering in this domain. And I believe that work that we're doing at Spark Endeavors can really make a difference. So when everything was getting hard for me, when all sorts of things started crashing and burning, when we had to devote a huge amount of time to sustaining myself emotionally, energetically, taking care of my family and friends and being there for my community and completely reimagining the other business that I run, and I had thoughts of just shelving this thing. I kept going back and saying, no, this really matters to me. I understand why I said yes to this. The reason I said why, not only is it still matter to me, but as I saw what unfolded over the last year and a half, it became more important to me than ever before, because I saw people dropping into this moment of profound existential questioning and reimagining. And if I thought that what I was working on would potentially be helpful before, that feeling only got stronger and stronger and stronger and remains paramount in my reason for saying yes to doing this thing. And that kept bringing me back. Knowing my why kept bringing me back. It brought me back not just to a generative, creative, action-oriented stance, but it kept bringing me back to a grounded sense of understanding why I was showing up and doing this every day. It let me feel a certain peace of mind to return to. And from that place, it allowed me to tap into my creative juices more effectively. The model that I want to share with you is what I call the good life buckets. Now, think of your life as having three major buckets. And if you want to make them folders, if you want to make them quadrants, elements, whatever it is, you do it in a way which makes you happy. I love the visual of a bucket. It's just really simple. And it also allows me to sort of do a quick check and ask myself, well, how full or empty are each one of these buckets? And what is my contribution to making them at that level? So the three buckets are connection, contribution, and vitality. And I'm going to walk you through each one of these and show you how I use them as a year-end process. The connection bucket is all about the depth and quality of relationships that happen in your life. The contribution bucket, that tends to be what people associate with work. It's what's the contribution you're making to the world and also to your life when you actually invest effort in a serious and sustained way. And the vitality bucket, well, that's all about your mind and your body, what we would call well-being. And the interesting thing is, if you think about life as these three buckets, well, then a good life happens when all three of these buckets are as full as humanly possible. And the interesting thing is that as we get older, and this is, I'm talking about your 20s and 30s, not necessarily your 70s and 80s or God willing longer, the buckets start to leak. So, and it's just a fact of life. It's not a good thing or a bad thing. We have these three good life buckets: connection, contribution, vitality, and they leak over time. They get a little bit rusty. They get a little bit creaky. So when you fill them up, if you don't develop a practice or a habit or a ritual of actually keeping them full, keeping them topped off, well, then eventually the leakiness makes them empty. And when any one bucket empties, it pulls down the other buckets too, because the buckets all flow into each other, right? So the notion is the buckets are all interconnected. They have like a little tube that goes from one to the other. The buckets all leak, and your ability to fill any one will always be limited by the level of your least full bucket. When you think about that model, what it tells you is that these three areas of life really matter. We can't just do something which says, I'm totally topped off. Like I've just gone on this incredible 5-day retreat. And then like with like my best friends in the world, and it's been the most incredible experience. I feel so deeply connected. My connection bucket is topped off. It's a 10 out of 10. I'm done. Now I can go focus on the other ones. It doesn't work that way because that bucket will start to empty. Again, not a bad thing, not a good thing. It's just a thing. But knowing that reminds us that we need to develop the practices, rituals, and habits to just continually cycle around. Think of it as you having sort of like a watering can, and you're sprinkling a little bit more into each one of those buckets to keep them nourished. If any one of those buckets starts to really run dry, it will slowly grind your entire life to a halt. If all three of them run dry, you effectively cease to live. So this is a model that has guided a lot of my behavior for a number of years now. And this is the model that I use when I start to head towards the end of the year to really reflect on my year. And I go bucket by bucket and I sort of do a bit of an assessment. So what I'd love to do today is walk you through how I do my end of year assessment using the model of the Good Life buckets. And we're going to take it one bucket at a time. We're going to talk about what fills each one of these buckets. And then I'm going to offer a set of prompts. So let's walk through these one at a time. And I'll share I'll share the model and I'll share how it shows up in my life and then invite you to explore it for your life. We're going to start out with the vitality bucket. Now, the vitality bucket is functionally about your mind and your body. Now, it's kind of funny for me to talk about those two things as if they're two things, as if they exist independent of each other. I think there was a notion for a long time that there's the mind, there's what happens in the head, and then there's the physical body, what happens in your from the neck down. And, they communicate with each other, but they're not really the same thing. What we know through a mountain of research now is that they are fundamentally interconnected. There's a seamless feedback mechanism that goes between them. So if your mindset is not in a good place, it is going to feed back to your physical body and create physical symptomology, everything from pain to soreness to illness. So it manifests that way. And the same thing happens if your physical body is in some way struggling or suffering. It is going to feed back to your mind, and it will literally affect your state of mind, your optimism, your positivity, your resilience, your equanimity. So I'm going to talk to you about filling your vitality bucket and thinking about how full or empty it's been over the last year using the model of the mind and the body. And I'm going to sort of like give you two separate images for each one of them. But I also want to make really clear that they weave together in a seamless way. And we can't just explore one without the other, and we can't just work with one without the other. So let's talk about first the mind side of our vitality bucket. So when I'm talking about optimizing your state of mind, or how full is your bucket in the context of your mind, your state of mind, we're looking at a couple of different elements. One, your level of awareness. How truthfully are you able to actually step into your life and be aware of what's really going on and what's not going on? And we know that it's really important because we cannot be intentional in life until we are aware. I'll say that again. We cannot be intentional until we are aware. And the reason is, in order to be intentional, in order to direct our lives, in order to grow in a direction that feels good and meaningful and alive to us, we actually have to be aware of where we are now, both our internal circumstances, our state of being, and also our external circumstances, our relational circumstances. So awareness, how aware are we? How open and honest and aware are we of the actual state of our lives in the moment? And you can think about that, right? Both in terms of a current state and also over the course of this year. So we're going to use the model of 2021. How tapped in, how truly open and aware and honest have I been of my life, my state of being over the course of this last year? Have I kind of put my head in the sand and checked out? Or have I actually really tried to tap into exactly what's going on around me, even when it's hard, even when there are things that I don't like about it, even when I'm struggling, even when I see things within myself and within my environment and within society and the world that really upset me? Am I allowing myself to not hide, to not ignore it, to not check out of being aware, but actually check into waking up to the truth and reality of my life? So that's one of the big parts of mindset. The other thing is, so some of the other qualities that I look at is, how has my access to calm, to ease, to equanimity been, right? And we know that if you can meet a circumstance and then somehow find a way to bring yourself back to a place of ease, that can be a profound enhancer of your day-to-day experience of life. So I look over the course of this last year and I ask myself, well, what is my current state of calm or ease? And then how have I been able to access this state over the last year? Another element of mindset and really being able to fill your vitality bucket through the state of mind side of it is focus. Have I actually been able to harness my attention and direct it in a way where I can zoom in and then use it to generate decisions and actions that create outcomes, right? Or has it been really scattered? And I know over the last year, really 2 years, this has been a really big challenge for so many of us, in no small part because of the state of the world around us, because just profound groundlessness and flux. And I get it. Remember, we're not looking to create any judgments here. All we're looking at is sort of the core metrics. And then we want to assess sort of where we are with each one of those things. So how has my focus been? Have I been able to actually harness my attention and use it to create decisions and take actions that lead to outcomes that are meaningful to me? We may or may not have been comfortable making friends as kids. Everyone sort of lies on a different part of the spectrum there. But what's kind of universally shared is that by the time we're an adult, whether you have a family or not, whether you're working a full-time job or not, we tend to change. We tend to be more protected, tend to be more suspicious. We tend to be less open, less vulnerable. And making new friends very often gets harder. Not for everybody, but from what I've seen, for most people, certainly for me, I'm raising my hand when I say that. I am a member of that club. And I think a lot of times also we rely on the friends that we made from as far back as we can imagine, because they know us the best and we trust them the most and they trust us the most. And we know that it takes a certain investment of energy and a risk of exposing who we are to make new friends. And once we're a little bit further into life, a lot of times we just don't want to go there. Like we're navigating and grappling with so much that the idea of spending that energy, of putting ourselves out, of taking the risk of not being accepted, it's just too much. So we kind of shut down and we accept, our friendship lot for the moment that we're in, and sometimes for life. And, I'm sharing this because in no small part, I'm describing myself. I love people, but I'm also introverted. I love people, and I'm also what Elaine Aron would describe as a highly sensitive person, which means that in part, I get sensitive in social situations to the extent where even loud noises or being in an environment that's super noisy for an extended period of time can make me start to withdraw. So I've had to figure out, okay, how do I have a vibrant set of friends and regular interaction with them and actually, quote, put myself out there, knowing that I'm actually pretty happy hanging out. I'm literally like in a recording studio where the walls are on either side of me and they're all padded. It's as quiet and cozy as you can get. Like, how do I step out of this setting? Or how do I invite people into this setting and create those friendships that aren't just superficial, but change you and sustain you for life? I run a couple of companies right now, but one is called Good Life Project. And we're most known, I think, these days for the podcast that we create. But bigger picture, for 5 years, when you zoom the lens out, we actually ran an adult summer camp where for generally the last 4 days of summer, every summer for 5 years, we would drop into this 160-acre kids sleepaway camp. Of course, after they cleaned the whole place out, because there was a lot of cleaning to do after the kids. And it was this great facility, and it was kids' bunks. They weren't winterized or summerized. You get what you get. A dozen bunks to each building, and we would kind of swoop in and we'd take it over. And we would spend the better part of the entire year figuring out how to create this near magical environment. And then we would welcome, by the end, we're welcoming about 450 people every year. They would come on planes, trains, automobiles. They would come from the other side of the world. We had people from Australia. Like literally, they would travel from the other side of the planet to get to this place to spend 4 days, often with total strangers. And very often they would come alone. They didn't come as a group, although they'd always leave as a group. And, we learned over that 5-year window that there were a lot of things that we could do, that we could think through. There are a lot of mechanisms that we could create. There was an ethos that we could cultivate. We could be very intentional about creating a dynamic that allowed total strangers who were often just stepping off of 24 hours of flying, multiple connections, 14-hour time difference, crossing the date line, to drop into this place in the middle of the country in a kid sleepaway camp, sleep a dozen to a bunk in like tiny little kid sleeping bunks, by the way, share bathrooms, and be amazingly comfortable and have it be this stunning experience, where our favorite thing to know would be like they came alone and they would leave with lifelong friends. So let's talk a little bit about some of the lessons that we learned through this 5-year experience of running our own adult summer camp. It's kind of fun. One of the first lessons that we really learned is that we needed to create what I called a safe container. Now, we did this in the context of, we literally took over a kids sleepaway camp. We removed people from their day-to-day environment. So all the stresses, all the distractions coming at you, all the devices that you're like distracting yourself with, like the phone calls, everything, the people bumping into you, none of that existed. So one of the things I realized is incredibly powerful is if you literally remove yourself to a place where it's almost you're stepping out of the ordinary world and into the extraordinary world. And you can almost think of this as the hero's journey of friendship. It's sort of what Joseph Campbell wrote about when he talked about the hero's journey. At some point, you cross the threshold and you leave the ordinary world and you step into the extraordinary world. And in my mind, making really deep new friendships, you could really see as a hero's or a heroine's journey. And it starts by stepping out of the ordinary world and into the extraordinary world. And we want to create a safe container for people to step into. And like I said, you can do that in the virtual space too. Brendan's done it. The whole team has done it in this community that we have here. So what actually makes it safe? Well, the physical environment, we wanted to really remove distractions. We want to create emotional safety also. And part of that we do by actually creating what I would call a shared ethos, or a shared value set. So when people would think about coming to camp, one of the things that they would actually think about is, well, will the people there be my people? Well, how do we know if they're my people? Same thing if you're like kind of thinking about, well, do I approach this other person, maybe make a new friendship? I'll know, are they my people? Because if they're not my people, this could get ugly fast. It's gonna be a really uncomfortable conversation, and I'm gonna feel awkward, and then I'm gonna run for the door, and then so that can still happen. And that's kind of the fun of actually putting yourself out there. Says the guy who hides in a digital cave as he speaks to you. And but what we did was, we realized that we needed to actually somehow telegraph our values and beliefs so that people could kind of like, before they even step into it, be like, oh yeah, I kind of see the world like this person and these people in this community. The way we did that was a couple of ways. I mean, number one, we had a lot of people who were listening to the podcast over a period of weeks and months and years. They started to understand my personal value set and know that that was a part of the community that we were creating. So they built it around what they knew of me. But we also wanted to separate it from me. And we actually created what I called a living creed. So this was a statement of belief. Some people might call it a manifesto. It was basically a one-page statement of beliefs and statement of values. And we published that for years. It was actually sort of front and center on our website. And we would make that also a part of camp. We say, this is what we believe in. If you go to the Good Life Project website now, for example, and look at the About page, we don't have that creed up there anymore. But it's really clear reading our story, what our values and beliefs are, what we aspire to, and what's meaningful to us, what's important to us. And I think we do that, in the digital domain by kind of like putting it out there. And this was in the context of somebody saying yes to an experience that would potentially allow them to create new friendships. So we can do that on an individual basis also. We may not necessarily put out like a statement of values and beliefs, but what we don't realize is we're actually doing that all day, every day. Old school version of that is, a lot of it was about what we wore. I'm a big fan of printed t-shirts, and the olden days where you go to concerts and you'd always come home with your concert t-shirt, and basically, whoever you were wearing said a lot about who you were, what your values were, what was important to you, the type of things that you liked. And that actually telegraphed a lot of it. These days, when we're trying to actually get a beat on, well, like, could this person be an interesting friend? And maybe we kind of want to know a little bit more about them before we even approach them. Social media has become the new printed t-shirt. So many people are out there on Instagram and Facebook and these days Discord and all the different platforms. And we're sharing all day, every day. And we're not only sharing our own stuff, we're sharing other people's stuff that resonates with us. And what we're effectively doing is we're identifying an ethos around our values, our beliefs, our hopes, our aspirations, our fears, our desires. And we are publishing that to the world to say, know me. We don't realize necessarily that's why we're doing it. We're just like, hey, this is fun or this is cool. We're putting it out there. But what's happening underneath the surface is we are sharing a deeper part of ourselves, and in part because we want to be known, but in part what it also does is it telegraphs something that leads in front of us should we then meet somebody or somebody want to actually reach out to us and become friends, because they'll say, hey, we see the world similarly. We share similar values and beliefs, and I want to know you. And it makes that conversation a little bit more comfortable. It creates that safety that I was talking about. It's one of the things that goes into creating a safe container that can potentially lead to friendship. The topic for today, and really for the month, advanced mindset and resilience. The way that I think about resilience when I think about it is the ability to move through moments and sometimes entire seasons of adversity, so that the experience of moving through it, the experience of interacting with it, the experience of dancing with it is something where you can access the greatest amount of equanimity, of peace and ease during the experience. I was thinking about what's the strongest experience that I've had where I've had to be incredibly resilient. And I kind of was focusing on business. So we actually run two companies, and one of them is a media company. And we produce this flagship podcast called Good Life Project. We've been doing it for years. We actually started as a video show, filming on location with a crew and cameras. And we transitioned 2 years into that to become pure audio, just a podcast. And we aired twice a week. So we have a very aggressive production schedule. I made a commitment very early on that we were not only going to create the most extraordinary production values that we could, but also the most intimate, the most real, the most open, honest, and revelatory conversations that we could do. We built a place to actually host this, where I controlled the entire environment. I would invite people in, and they would come in, and we would close the door behind them. And we'd sit in these two really comfy chairs with this super plush rug and a pretty intimate setting and with headphones on so we could hear each other in our ears and we could see each other. We're looking at each other. That in-person format, for me, it was sacred. So we're 6 years into this format. We're known for hosting these intimate in-person things where you can literally hear the occasional siren coming through the studio, like the 4 layers of acoustic glass. And my belief, I have this deeply held belief that we cannot host the quality and the depth of conversation that I am comfortable producing if we have to do it remotely. And then all of a sudden, a year ago hits. We had a quick meeting with the team and said, okay, we can't do this anymore. We can't, this thing that we've held so sacred, our entire business, our pride, my ego, the brand was built around the extraordinary quality of the conversations and the production value of being in a studio, being up close with these really super high quality microphones and no echo and things like that. We had to make a decision because we were faced with mass disruption. And remember last year, everything kind of hit New York very early in the year. And New York just started to shut down everything. It was like the dominoes are falling in everything within a matter of days. The entire city is just shutting down. And we're thinking to ourselves, okay, so if we stick to this ethos, we're going to go on hiatus, or we're literally going to shut down the company and the community and the podcast. And we had other shows that we had started to work on developing as well. So the choice was, we didn't want this level of disruption. We didn't ask for it. We didn't see it coming. Nobody saw it coming. But here it is. This is adversity on the extreme level where it effectively had the potential to take out my entire business. But also, it made me kind of rethink, what are the assumptions? What are the assumptions that have gotten me to this place? And how can I change those assumptions? How can I respond to it? How can I see the possibility side of what's happening here and not just feel like I'm being pummeled all day, every day by the disruption, by the adversity? Because that's the heartbeat of resilience, is being able to see the other story in the face of adversity. So what we did was start to test, and we started to say, okay, so there's a certain amount of forgiveness in the world right now. We all know that we're doing the best that we can. Why don't we take this window of time? Let's experiment. How close can we get to what we were able to do in person in the studio? And what we found was we started testing all these different platforms, and we're like, sort of like the Goldilocks story, not quite, not quite, not quite. And then eventually we started to land on platforms for different things that were like, you know what? It's not the same as being in the studio, but it's good enough for now. So then we said, okay, how do we take this and try and make it even better? And we started to test a wide range of microphones that were shippable. And we started shipping microphones around to all of our guests. So if anybody didn't have the quality of recording equipment that we felt was important, we would literally buy it for them. And we still do that to this day. We realized that there was a lot that we could do in post-production. So we up-leveled our team. Our editor went into and trained to learn a lot more about post-production. We brought on a high-level sound engineer to fix all sorts of things. And that added a lot to the back end of what we're doing. But what we started to learn over time is that this assumption that I had about the only way that things are going to be okay is if we do it this way. When adversity dropped into my lap, when it sort of exploded into the world and into my world and my business, and I couldn't do it that way anymore. I literally, all the assumptions that I made and all the choices that were based on those assumptions were blown up. I could not keep making those choices. I can either shut it down and cave to adversity, or I can say, okay, so what is the possibility story here? How do we dance with this? How do we move through it? And what we start to realize is this now opens the entire universe to us. So now, if there's a guest in a different country, or if there's a guest across the country, or there's a guest in the Southern Hemisphere, we can now coordinate that. So all of a sudden, we're able to sit down with people who just never would have been able to be on the podcast and in conversation with me. What I discovered was because so many people are actually doing it from their homes, that the home created its own sense of virtual intimacy or remote intimacy. They were intimate in their space. I was intimate in my space. And that intimacy, even if it was 1,000 miles apart, it bridged the chasm to create this sort of, like virtual ethereal container of safety and sanctity. And that really surprised me. And now, as we sort of like step into what I would consider, emerging our way slowly into a new season, now we're starting to actually think about, well, where do we go from here? When in fact it is safe to be back in a room, back in a studio together, are we going to automatically do that? And my honest answer right now, because we've been so convinced and so blown away and so surprised by dropping our assumptions, by simply kind of surrendering to the truth of the circumstance, and by actively seeking out the possibility story, and then trying to increase the volume of possibility as much as humanly possible, we've been really dramatically surprised, because there are some really powerful benefits to not doing it. So not only do I feel like we have sort of bounced back to the place that we were before, but I think we've balanced forward to a certain extent to increased possibility. We may very well end up doing a hybrid model where we film and we record and we do the audio in studio, and then a whole bunch of other things we do remotely, because now we know how to do that. And because now people we want to speak to and people who want to speak to us, we can bring ourselves together in the virtual space in a way that either never would have happened face to face, or it would have taken months or years to pull the whole thing off. So I think the meta idea, when I think about adversity and resilience, it's sort of like the key for me is really, it's the notion of what I call the possibility story, right? So, and I call it the law of possibility. Is this a proven law? No, but it sounds kind of fun. For every disruption, there is an equal and opposite possibility. So our job in moments of adversity is to ask the question, what is the possibility story? I want to focus on something very unique and very specific in my presentation today. So when we think about leadership, there's sort of an old trope, which is it's all about motivation. Like leadership is about motivation. How do I motivate people to do X, Y, or Z so that we can make it happen, really effectively, and then we accomplish the big goal. And as a leader, I feel good about it. And a lot of the conversation around that is, what do we do externally? How do we build better communications so that we really understand what the expectations are and what the mission is and what the vision is, and there's clarity and reinforcement and feedback on progress? How do we build culture in a way that's positive and constructive and generative and respectful and lead with dignity? And all of those things are super important. What I want to focus on is what I call the inside game of leadership. And what sort of has really captured my curiosity for a lot of years is why we do the things we do. A number of years back, Dan Pink, who's a friend, wrote a book called Drive. And he took a really deep look at motivation. What he learned was that, we tend to have one or two things to try and lead people to a particular outcome. He called it a carrot and a stick, the thing that you're working towards or the thing that you're trying to avoid and you're working away from. And he said, it's kind of an old model, for us to lead ourselves, to work really hard towards a particular desired goal or lead others, teams, groups, people, companies, divisions, something a little bit more innate has to happen. We have to figure out what is that innate driver of effort that makes us come alive, that nourishes us with a sense of purpose and meaning and flow and expressed potential, and drops us into a place of possibility and belief that things that maybe you didn't even think were possible actually just might be so. So I have spent years now really diving deep into what are these deeper impulses? What is that innate thing that exists inside all of us, to try and understand how we can harness it, how we can first identify it and then harness it. And I have to tell you, I came to believe something that had you asked me 10, 15 years ago, I probably would have laughed at you if you said this existed. What I came to believe is that we all have a unique imprint for work that makes us come alive. And I call these things your sparketypes, your sparketypes. Now, what does that actually mean? The sparketype is, think of it as two different things bundled together. So first we have an impulse for effort. And we have this impulse. We don't know where it comes from. A lot of folks have asked me, where do these impulses come from? And my answer is, it could be genetic. It could be behavioral. It could be environmental. It could be some blend of all three. Some people may believe that they're preordained by some sort of larger spiritual body. I'm actually kind of not entirely interested in the answer to that question. But what I have come to believe is they're there. And we've now seen that in more than 500,000 people that have been part of an ongoing study for the last 3 years through an assessment that we developed. And what we've learned is that there exist 10 unique impulses or imprints. And this is an impulse where you just feel like you would work really hard, you invest effort and energy in a particular way for no other reason than the way it makes you feel. Now, you may be really well compensated by this. You may be a part of a team where it is incredibly needed and necessary and valued, or you might just do it because it's the thing you can't not do. You know, you may be a parent expressing this impulse in the context of raising a child, or a companion in the context of keeping somebody company, or any other domain. But these impulses are there. And what we've learned over the years, after deconstructing and deconstructing, is that we have 10 of these impulses. And wrapped around each one of these 10 impulses are a series of preferences, behaviors, and tendencies that tend to show up and form archetypes. So I coined the phrase sparketypes because it is the imprint or the archetype for work that sparks you, work that makes you come alive. So when I'm talking about the phrase coming alive, I'm talking about effort that gives you a sense of meaning, like who you are and what you're doing actually matters to you and maybe to the world. A feeling of excitement and energy, like full engagement, a feeling that you are easily lost or absorbed in that flow state where everything feels like you're just completely a part of it. Time fugues, you can blink and maybe it's been a minute, maybe it's been 10 hours. A sense that all of your potential is being expressed fully. There's nothing left behind. And more broadly, you have a stronger sense of purpose in life. But I think it would probably be helpful if I just quickly kind of walked you through these 10 different types. So the first type is what we call the maven, right? The maven. Now, the maven, the primary impulse is all about knowledge acquisition. It's about learning. It's driven by a fierce sense of curiosity or fascination. You live to learn, knowledge acquisition. Now we call the second sparketype the maker. Now, my primary sparketype, and that means my strongest impulse for effort, is the maker. The maker is all about making ideas manifest. We create things. So the energy of creation is the fundamental drive. I literally wake up in the morning and I look around and I'm like, what can I make today? So that's the primary impulse of the maker. Now, the third one is the scientist. And the scientist is all about the burning question, the quandary, the puzzle. The fundamental energy of the scientist is figuring things out. It's problem solving. So let's talk about the next one. We call this the essentialist. Now, the essentialist is all about creating clarity and order from chaos. They're the ones who think often in spreadsheets, processes, systems. It's all about looking at sort of like big complex data sets or tons of things or stuff and organizing it, but not just for the purpose of it being organized, but for the purpose of creating a sense of calmness and clarity. So let's talk about the performer. Now, the performer is all about animating and enlivening interactions, moments, and experiences. The next sparketype is what we call the warrior. And the energy of the warrior, the impulse of the warrior, is to gather and lead. So the warrior brings together a group of people, and they're very often one of those people, by the way. They may be affected by something that they want to see change, or maybe they want to go on a great adventure. And they're one of the people who has this Jones. So they bring together a group of people. They kind of bring them all in. They gather them together, and then they step into a leadership position. And they say, okay, here's where we're starting. Here's the mission of where we're going to go. And I am going to lead us there. The energy of a leader is ferocity. So next up, we have what I call the sage. Now, the fundamental impulse of the sage is to instill insight. So the same way that the maven is all about knowledge acquisition, like I'm going to get encyclopedic and bring it all into my head. The sage is all about whatever's in my head. I want it out there. I want to share it with everybody. And most sages, even when they're learning, they're actually learning for the purpose of being a better sharer of knowledge. Next up, we have what I call the advisor. And the advisor is all about guiding people through a process of growth. Very often, the advisor operates in an intimate, trust-based container of safety and respect and dignity. We're getting really close. Final two archetypes here. So the advocate. The advocate is all about championing ideas and ideals. Now, this could be an individual. This could be a community. It could be human beings. It could be the environment. It could be animals, or it could be an idea or a concept. So an advocate may be sitting around a conference room table, and people could be brainstorming and throwing out ideas. And there could be an idea that's really quietly sitting on the side, or maybe somebody told the advocate about their idea beforehand, but they were a very quieter person. They were more introverted. And in a group setting, they weren't comfortable bringing it out and really advocating for it. And the advocate may say, okay, there's this one idea that is super important and super valuable, and we need to center it in the conversation and bring it attention and energy. And that is often an incredibly powerful role. The advocates often become a strong activist. And finally, we bring it home with what I call the nurturer. And the fundamental impulse of the nurturer is all about elevation. It's about giving care and taking care of others. And again, similar to the advisor or similar to the advocate, this may be for an individual. It may be for a small group. It may be animals. It may be the environment. The subject of the nurturing and the elevation, it can be incredibly individual, but they wake up in the morning and there's a fundamental DNA level impulse to nurture, to take care of others, to elevate them for no other reason than the way it makes them feel in the process of doing it and the effect that they actually see on others while they're doing it. So those are the 10 different archetypes that we've talked about. And you may be thinking, well, okay, as I described the different ones, you're like, well, am I that one? Am I that one? Am I that one? Am I that one? And what we've learned through developing an assessment and now having a huge data set that's growing really rapidly by the day is that none of us are just one of these. We tend to be a combination, but we tend to have two really strong impulses sort of like at the top of our spectrum, and also on the other side, a very weak one. We call the two ones your primary and your shadow archetype. Your primary is your strongest impulse for effort, for no other reason than just the way it makes you feel like you're doing the thing you're here to do. And your shadow, you can either look at as your kind of your runner-up, or very often there's a more nuanced relationship between your shadow and your primary. And that is this: you do the work of your shadow in order to be able to do the work of your primary better. Quick example, I am what I call a maker scientist, maker primary and scientist shadow. Now I'm all about making stuff, but inevitably in the process of creation, I hit a wall, I hit a problem, I need something solved. So I'll sort of drop into my maker or my scientist side of my brain and say, okay, how do I figure this out? How do I release myself from this quandary? How do I go deep into this particular problem? And then as soon as I have what I need to go back to the more generative process of creation, I'll shift back into maker mode.
This can be your day for personal growth. This can be that day you committed to and you remember and you go, that was the day I got myself a community. I got better coaches. I committed to making my life the absolute best that I could. This is that day. Make today your growth day. Click the button on this page and sign up right now.